Hello everyone, in this video you guys are going to master how to play against the King's Indian attack with the black pieces. And believe me, this is the best video. So if you are new, make sure to subscribe the channel. You are going to simply fall in love, so let's begin. So what is King's Indian attack first of all? So basically, what happens in King's Indian, white plays 1 e4, e6, d3, d5, white puts the knight on d2, c5, white plays knight to f3, we play knight c6, black plays g3, and now generally black plays knight to f6, which is the main move. I'm showing you the main line. Bishop g2, bishop e7, short castle, white plays rook to e1, queen c7, white pushes the pawn attacking the knight goes back, queen e2, defending the pawn, b6, knight f1. This is a traditional way to play. Okay, so just don't focus on this line too much. h4, rook e8, bishop f4, queen d8, knight h2, a6, c3, basically blocking the center now first, and now white starts to get some creative attacks on the king side, and eventually after a couple of moves black simply gets a forced checkmate. That's game over. That's how white usually play. If you are a King's Indian player, I think you probably know this. Okay, so in this video I'm simply going to change the game. I'm going to change the game of how to play against the King's Indian attack. So first of all, this particular position can land in many ways. Okay, there are many ways to play the position. Starting with e4, as you guys know, I play the French defense, so we are going to look at the French. d3, d5, knight d2, because if we try to capture with the pawn, white is going to recapture with the pawn. So black plays c5, expanding in the center, knight to f3, knight c6, g3, and now after g3 we are not going to play knight to f6, but we are going to play the move bishop to d6. This is how we are going to play. What is the idea? We are covering the e5 square. We are not allowing the opponent to push the pawn to e5. White develops the bishop, we develop the knight to e7. Not on f6, but to e7. Short castle, rook e1. Now once again, white's idea is to play e5. So we stop it with queen c7, queen e2. Once again the idea is to play e5. We stop it with the move f6. You see, the knight goes on e7 so that we can play f6. And now there are generally ways for white to play. Okay, so first of all, looking at the h4 move, which resembles the same which happens in the King's Indian attack. After h4, we play the move bishop to d7, simply finishing our development. White plays c3, because c3 is a move you have to play, because you want to open up the center. So the moment white plays c3 with the idea of d4, we play d4 by ourselves, not allowing the opponent to play d4. And now white is having ways. White can either take the pawn, or white can either push the pawn. That's it. So first of all, if white takes the pawn, we take back with the pawn. White plays a3 with the idea of maybe expanding on the queen side. We simply play e5. So we want this particular structure. We are aiming for this particular pawn structure. This is our idea. White plays b4, expanding on the queen side. At the first glance, it looks like a nice idea, but believe me, it's a bad idea. Why? Because these pawns are now eventually going to be big weaknesses. We can play b5 first, stopping white from playing b5. We play b5, and now the idea here is we are going to put our bishop on e6, which is the best square for the bishop, and eventually we are going to play a5, putting pressure on the pawn on b4. White takes, we are going to take back with the rook, now putting pressure on e3, and believe me, eventually, just in your mind, just believe that we have traded both of these pawns. White is simply having a big weakness on d3. White is having a big weakness on d3, which we are going to target in the future. White is going to struggle. That's it. Okay, so going back a bit, that's exactly what happens if white takes on d4. If white pushes the pawn to c4, now we play e5. Once again, the same idea. We want this particular structure. And now white plays knight to f1, the same idea which white usually goes in the King's Indian attack. We play rook f7. What is the idea of rook f7? So you see, in this particular opening, in this particular setup, Black is generally having two pawn breaks in the position. One pawn break is to play with some b5 ideas, like a6, b5. Eventually you need to get this b5 break. And another idea here is, you generally try to get this f5 break. So there are two breaks available in the position, f5 break and the b5 break. So first of all, as the center has been closed, white has also tried to close on the queen side by putting his pawn on c4, locking down the position on the queen side. But to be very frank, first of all, white can never think of generating play on the queen side because we are the one having a complete control on the b4 square. At the best time, we can even play a5, but that's we try not to play it because eventually our idea is to play a6, b5. So it's very hard for white to achieve the move b4 in the position. So expect no counterplay from the white side on the queen side. Okay, there is no counterplay going to come with the white pieces on the queen side. So the only hope that white is having is to attack on the king side, just by playing some knight h2, g4, h5 ideas. So first we are going to neutralize complete play on the king side, and eventually at the right time we are going to start generating play on the queen side. So after knight f1 we play rook f7. Maybe the idea could be to get the other rook into the game, maybe on g8 or f8. White plays knight h2. We pull our king on h8, which is the best square for the king because we never know. We might have to push g6 or even g5 in the future. Generally, we can play g6, f5, and that's the stuff. And now we are giving some ideas to the rook on 8, whether he wants to go on f8 or whether he wants to go on g8. White plays g4, trying to attack. Knight goes to d6. So you see, just try to think. The knight on c6 is absolutely doing nothing. The knight on c6 is doing nothing, already blocked by his own pawns. If I just place this knight on e6, the knight is doing something. He's controlling the squares. So we play knight to d8, put our knight to e6. Yeah? The king goes to h1 with the idea of putting the rook on g1, maybe trying to attack. It can be an idea. Rook g8, white plays rook g1, and now we play the move g6. Because first of all, if white closes the center, we are pretty happy. Now we are having the super powerful break f5 in the position, or we can even play g5, just putting the knight on f4. That's it. That's how we are going to play, and even going to for capturing this particular pawn on h6 and eventually going to win the game. So if white goes for capturing the pawn, which makes a complete sense, we capture with the pawn, and believe me, now there is an idea of rook f7. Now we can play rook h7, get this f5 break, or even g5 knight f4. I don't think white is ever going to attack in this particular position. We are the one in the driver's seat. We are the player who is going to attack. White is only going to suffer. That's the complete story. So that's exactly what happens if white plays h4. Now we are going to discuss what happens if white plays c3. We once again play d4, stopping everything in the center. White can play c4 or white can either go for takes. First discussing what if white pushes the pawn, closing down the position on the queen side. We play e5, once again aiming for this particular pawn structure. White plays rook f1. So I believe rook f1 makes sense because white wants to play f4. This is the main idea because white can never think of even generating any amount of counterplay on the queen side. So white's only hope is to play on the king side. So white plays rook f1. Bishop goes to e6. This is the best square for the bishop. And now knight to h4. Okay, with the idea of playing f4 in the position. And now the moment white plays knight h4, now we already have moves like g5 in the position, which attacks the knight. And now the knight is having two ways. Knight can either go in, jump on f5, sacrificing a pawn, or the knight can simply go back. So first of all, if the knight goes back, now we can play a6, as I said, with the idea of simply expanding on the queen side. b3, b5. And now, for example, if white does nothing, white absolutely waits, that's it. Bishop b2. We are going to play knight to g6 because the knight on e7 was already doing nothing. So it's better to put, like, simply improve our pieces. That's the idea. h3, once again, just making waiting moves, that's it. Rook f7, takes. This is the idea. Like, if white ever takes on b5, we are going to take with the a pawn. And now, you see, now there are ideas of c5 break at the right time. We are attacking the pawn on h2. This is how we are going to play the position. And believe me, I don't see how white is going to play. We are dominating on the king side and we are also dominating on the queen side. White is just struggling, that's it. So going back, that's exactly what happens if white simply waits. If white tries to do something, maybe h4, trying to generate some counterplay. If we take the pawn, white's idea is to capture with the knight. So now we are going to play h6. Just h6, that's it. We are just protecting the g5 pawn. Like many players would like to play g4, the knight goes back, h5. This is the wrong idea, my friend, because now white can have some counterplay with the idea of f3, breaking apart on the king side. So we don't want this. We don't want this. We are going to simply play h6. White can take, we can take with the h pawn. And believe me, now the idea is simply play king g7, rook h8, and we are the one attacking the white king now. Once again, this is the idea. So that's exactly what happens if white simply goes back with the knight. If white knights jump on f5, sacrificing a pawn, now black is a pawn up, and now white puts his knight on e4. Saying that, okay, now my bishop is opened up, I'm putting my knight on e4. How are you going to continue the position? We play h6. So once again, we want to first of all protect everything. White goes for f4. We can take the pawn. White takes the pawn, and now absolutely doing nothing. Just improving the position. That's it. King g7. Protecting the pawn on h6 and f6. That's how we play. White tries to play queen h5, getting in with his pieces, but absolutely no problem. Bishop g6, kicking the queen back, and now rook e8. And you see now, first of all, everything is well protected, nothing is hanging. We have got all our pieces into the game, and once again, we are a pawn up. So we are completely winning in the position. I don't see any way for white to create any chances of playing the position. That's exactly what happens if white plays c4, locking down the position. If white plays c cross g4, we are going to capture the pawn back. White jumps in with knight c4, e5. White plays bishop d2, bishop e6, attacking the knight. White takes the bishop, takes, and now we have e3. And believe me, maximum number of the times, this is the main position, or you can say the exact position you are going to get on your games, in your games, if you're playing against good players who have a sense of clarity of how to play chess. a3 with the idea of playing b4. We are going to play a5, stopping b4 first, rook c1, a4. What is the idea? The idea is very deep. So first of all, we have stopped white's counterplay with the idea of b4. And now the idea is to simply put the knight on b3. This is the exact idea. White tries to play knight h4. Once again, the same idea of playing f4, because white is having absolutely no counterplay on the queen side now. Knight goes to h4. We play queen d7. And remember, queen d7 is a very important move you must remember in such positions whenever white plays knight f4. Why? Because after queen d7, many of the times the idea is to simply cover the f5 square, not allowing the white knight to jump on f5. This is the main purpose of playing the move queen d7 many times. So after queen d7, white plays f4, we play knight f5. We simply ignore the threat of white. If white wants to push, he can push. If he wants to take, he can take. He is free to choose. We play knight to a5 with the idea of knight b3. So white is like, okay, now let me first remove the knight. Rook a5, and now white is having the options. He can either take or he can either push. So first, if he takes, we are going to take with the rook, not with the pawn, because if we take with the pawn, it only creates weakness. We take with the rook, and now what is the good thing happening over here? What is the idea? The idea is to simply put the rook on b3, putting pressure on the pawn on d3. The knight on e7 is going to go on e5, putting pressure on the pawn on d3. And maybe at some point, we can even play queen b5, putting pressure on the pawn on d3. You see, we simply attack white's weaknesses. That's how we are going to play. So going back a bit, if white tries to push the pawn, we go back. White tries to push the pawn, trying to expand on the king side. We play rook b5. Knight goes to f3 with the idea of maybe h4 g5. We play knight to c6. You see, the knight is doing nothing. So with the idea of putting the knight over here, with this particular journey, knight f5, knight to b3. White plays h4. And now many of the players with the black pieces must be feeling, okay, now there's some sort of an attack coming. But believe me, nothing is happening. White wants to play g5. So we first stop it with h6. White still plays g5. And now just try to think. How can white continue the position? If white takes the pawn, we can take the pawn. If white push the pawn, we are super happy. We can pull back the bishop and complete king side is blocked up, and now we are having a complete free play on the queen side. There are many weaknesses on the queen side. We can win material and we can win the game. If white takes the pawn on f6, we can simply take it back. And nothing is happening. We are going to play knight f5 with the idea of knight b3. So white tries to run away with rook f1, trying to put his pieces on the king side now. And now you see, white is having all his pieces on the king side. And we are like as chill as possible. We have absolute confidence in this particular setup that no attack is going to come in this particular position. Rook c8, getting the pieces on the queen side. White takes, we take back. Because if white pushes the pawn, we are super happy. Bishop e8. There is no breaks available in the position. Rook c5, rook c2, and how white is going to continue. Black is completely winning. So white tries to play gh6. We recapture the pawn. White plays king h1, maybe with the idea of rook g1, trying to attack the black king. Rook c5, as I said, with the idea of jumping in with the rook. White tries to play rook f2, not allowing black to push, like trying to get in. We play queen c6. Once again, the idea is to get in. And now white can't stop it, so white tries to play rook g1. There could be some ideas of moving the bishop, giving some direct checks, but that's not really possible in this particular position because nothing is hanging. We simply go rook c2, queen goes back, we play king h7. Safeguarding our king, and believe me, there is no attack. You see, this pawn covers this square, the bishop covers these squares, this pawn covers this square, this pawn is protected by the king, this pawn is protected by the queen, and nothing is happening. For example, if white trades the rook and play knight h2 with the idea of knight g4, putting some pressure, h5, and that's it. The pawn is protected by the bishop, g5 square is protected by the pawn, g4 square is covered by the pawn, h6, g6 square is covered by the bishop and the king. And there are already pawns on f5, f6, h4. e5 pawn covers the square of f4. So you see, all these squares are already covered. White can't even think of getting in. There are no possible squares for the enemy to enter in the position. We are like, in the worst case, we are having rook g8 available. So white tries to go back, bishop f1, but queen d2. In the worst case, we can trade off the queens. And now white is not having the queen, so he can't really attack now. We just need to get our rook, capture pawns, make a queen, game is over. That's how we are going to play against the King's Indian attack. That's it. That's absolutely it. So first of all, this particular position can also land via different openings. For example, white plays actually first one knight f3, not e4, but one knight f3. This is the usual way. e6, g3, d5. This is how we are going to play. We just need to remember the structure. That's it. Bishop goes to g2, c5, d3. We first develop the knight, develop the bishop. We do not develop the knight to f6 because the knight goes to e7. We first develop the bishop. White pushes the pawn, we push the pawn. White push the pawn, we push the pawn in the center. And you see, with the idea of knight e7, f6 still coming up. Rook goes to e1, knight e7. Queen c2, short castle. Knight d2, f6. Knight c4, bishop e6. You have the same position. Congratulations. You have the same position. We have achieved this pawn structure. And now we are once again having many ideas. b5, the main break. f5 is the second break. But the main plan is to play on the queen side. So b5, takes, a5, getting the f rook in on the c file. We are pretty happy. That's how we are going to play. So yeah, that's it. That's how you're going to play against the King's Indian attack. That's how you're going to crush the King's Indian attack. So I hope that this video was helpful and must have increased your knowledge about this King's Indian attack. If you love this particular analysis, and I believe this is the best structure, I've already seen some lifetime repertoires that have been created by grandmasters, top grandmasters, and they don't really have any particular solution for this particular opening against the King's Indian attack. This is the best setup you can ever achieve in your games. That's it. This is like of a cheat code. Okay. So yeah, if you are new, make sure to subscribe so that I would be posting such interesting chess contents. And yeah, I hope to see you very soon. If you want any particular topic video, make sure to tell me in the comments, and I'm going to come up with that particular topic on. So I'm going to see you soon. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess. Bye bye.